So this is very similar to data storage in other languages. We have constants, which is just a value that is unchangeable. So once you define a constant, that value does not change. We have data variables, which are initialized with a specific value, and then that can be changed later on by means of function expressions. A variable contains exactly one value of a predefined type. So if you look at the variable definition here, we have defined data var, then the variable name, the type, and then the value. So unlike a constant, you do have to define the type that it is. Variables can be read using built-in functions called var get and changed using var set, and we will be using both of those today. And then we have maps. Maps are a collection of data identified by other data. They are kind of like tuples in that they have a key value pair, but unlike tuple keys, data map keys are not hard-coded names. So it's basically it's more dynamic than tuples in that you can assign it to like an arbitrary value that you can then access later based on who's calling into the function. Like tuples, maps are not iterable. The only way to access the value is by specifying the right key. And we will also get an example of this today. So this here is a chart of the Clarity type system. You can actually find this in the Clarity book under chapter 4 on variables. And I have the link to that, so I will drop it in the chat real quick. So there's that. So this kind of tells you what the signatures are for each type. One thing that I do want to point out quickly while we're here, if you're looking at the types, you may notice that some of these types have an additional parameter of max len or max length. These are also strictly enforced. So as you start to familiarize yourself with the types, these ones like string, for example, that have a max len, that is a parameter that is required. So that's just something to keep in mind. And I think I can probably do an example of that here in the REPL. So say I want to define, I'm going to define a variable. I'm just going to call it my string. And I'm going to make it a, we'll do an ASCII string. So the signature for that is string dash ASCII, and then the length. So let's say I give this a length of 2, and then I pass to it my string value, and I say hello. Okay, yeah. So I'm getting an error here. It's saying expecting expression of type string 2 found string 5. So basically what's happening here is that I'm defining my variable and I'm saying I'm going to give it a string with a max length of 2, but then I pass in hello, which is obviously more than 2. So Clarity saying you can't do that. So if I was to bump this up to say 9, then our error is gone. So yeah, something to keep in mind there. These types that have a defined max length, those are also strictly enforced. Okay, moving on to functions. There's 3 types of functions in Clarity. We have public, private, and read-only functions. We will be working with all of these as we move through the course. But just real quickly, a public function is basically a function that is callable from the outside by both standard principles and contract principles. Meaning once it's deployed on mainnet, a user can call into this function, and also other contracts can call into public functions. All contracts that are deployed need to have at least one public function. And all public functions have to return a response type of OK or error. Then we have private functions. So these are callable only by the current contract. So they can't be called from the outside by a user or by any other contracts. It's only used within the specific contract file that you're working in. These are often used kind of like as helper functions to cut down on code repetition or to just help reduce code complexity. So if you're writing, a function and you have a specific expression that you find yourself using multiple times, then you might want to consider just exporting that into a private function and then calling that function instead of having repeated expressions. Then we have read-only functions, which can be called either by the contract itself or from the outside. And like the name implies, they are used just to read some value. So they can only perform read operations. You cannot do any kind of write operation or changing any kind of state within a read-only function. Clarity will throw you a little error and tell you that you can do that. You can't do that. Read-only functions also do not require a transaction cost, right? So if you have read-only functions to just get like an ID of something, for example, a user does not have to pay a transaction fee for that.